Hi everyone. So season two of Procurement Horizon, and it keeps getting better and better. We have Leanne Davy again with us. Some of you might remember her from, her session in season one, where we talked a lot about conflict. Today it's a different topic. And Leanne is launching her new book called Thoughtload, which I've had the privilege to be one of the first few to read and, provide some feedback on. That's an honor, Leanne. Thank you. And yeah, so happy to have you here.
Oh, I'm so excited to be back. And I'm thrilled that you got to be one of the first people, really one of the first handful of people to read Thoughtload, because you were such an important contributor to the ideas as the book was forming. So it's only right that you get to be first to come and see it once it's born. It's real.
And today, I also got to be the first to see the hard copy. Maybe
I
we can do
know.
that to
You want
everyone.
the real thing. It's here. Yeah.
So
So
exciting.
I'm so excited. It's anytime you work with Page Two, who is my publisher, they put as much work into the design of a book to make the design work with the concept of the book as they do into helping you edit the text. So she's a beauty. I'm very happy.
She is, and I just to give you an idea of Leanne's background. Leanne is an organizational psychologist. She spent years, trying to help teams learn about productivity, working better, resolve conflicts. She's a New York Times bestselling author. I keep saying that because I don't know too many of them. And the first time, what I remember most about Leanne, that sometimes I do these crazy things, that I reach out to authors whose books I like, and like let them know. And when I told the same thing to Leanne that, hey, I really loved your book, The Good Fight, and we're reading it as a book club in our book club at my previous organization. She said, why don't I come in and join you guys in one of the sessions? And I was like, I couldn't believe it was happening. So
It's so
thank
funny because certainly there are authors who are much more successful than me that wouldn't be able to kind of respond to I'm always surprised when people who get value from your book are surprised that as authors that's really exciting for us, because it's amazing. The work is so solitary in writing a book. It takes years to form the idea and turn it into a book. So when someone says this is helping me think differently, or our procurement book club is, for me that's like, yay. Like, because also I want to learn from what are your questions, right? And what was clear and what wasn't, and what's the next thing you have to worry about. So it was such a pleasure. And so few people do reach out. So it was wonderful that you did. And of course, this friendship that's now gone on for years since then stemmed from it. So
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
lovely.
thank you. Thank you for saying that. It means so much, like I love your work, everything you write, there's always this energy that comes in it. And like despite being so successful, I think I really like that, you're able to stay connected to the ideas and people behind those ideas. And talking about
Yeah.
ideas, Leanne,
I
I
do
want
like
to
to
take
talk about ideas. It's true.
yeah, like thought load. And I had never heard of that. I didn't know how to describe it. It's
Yeah.
something I felt, but like, yeah, like people just called it workload or, like, which is not even
Right.
half of it.
Right.
So, yeah, what prompted you on this idea?
Yeah. So let me, just for fun, because I haven't really told the story before, let me tell you the actual story of where it came from. So, about 6 or 7 years ago now, people always, one of the most common keynote speaking topics that's in demand is about change, because there's so much change. And I wrote a speech called Change Has Changed. And it was really reflecting on how the models I learned about change management in graduate school or in the early days of my consulting career, like Kurt Lewin's unfreeze, change, refreeze model, or John Cotter's 7-step model, none of these felt up to the task of what change looked like. So I started writing this speech, and basically the concept was the human brain and body has responded to change the same way for millennia. That's not new or different. But it used to be that change in our organizations was an event Right. So if I think about early days in my consulting career, we would help organizations do these big changes. And it was like a 2-year thing. And we had binders with tabs and laminated stuff. And even I have a whole bunch of swag. I have a toque from one company. I'm not even sure the company exists anymore because the change was such a big deal. We branded it and had swag. And what I realized is that change isn't an event anymore. Change is perpetual. So I started as a psychologist trying to figure out, what does that mean? How do we need to manage differently in times of perpetual change? And that led to this speech that said, we need to focus on 3 things. Instead of managing performance, we need to think about managing performance as an outcome. And instead, we need to manage attention, we need to manage anxiety, and we need to manage energy. And like every good book, it sort of got workshopped in, keynotes, in sessions with consulting clients. And this idea kind of morphed into, we need to pay attention to different things to perform well in perpetual change. And then one day I was on the stage and somebody asked a question from the audience, something about their workload. Don't you think that workload is too high? And I thought about it for a sec. And as often happens, my best ideas come when I'm on the stage, true extrovert. And I said, it's not the workload that's killing us. It's the thought load. And the whole room went silent. I had just made up a word. Like, that's not a word, Leanne. Every time for the first couple of years, my grammar checker kept wanting to make it 2 words. I'm like, it's not 2 words, it's 1 word. If there could be workload, there could be thought load.
Okay.
And when the room went silent, I knew that this word conveyed so much more to people. And so then the research began in understanding, okay, what is this word I just invented? What is this concept? So let me shut up for a sec, but because I could just like go nonstop, but that's how it all evolved. It evolved from, and if you want the data, some of I know you have sort of evidence-based listeners. The data came from Gartner. They had a study that in 2016, the average employee went through 2 enterprise level transformations each year. 2. And with 2, the buy-in and engagement and support of those change initiatives sat at about 75%. 6 years later, 6 years, like just a blink of an eye later, that number was up to 10 transformations a year, and buy-in was down below 35%. So that's what I mean when I say change has changed. If you have 2 a year, you can have the binders and the hat and the t-shirt and the laminated stuff. If you have 10, and you can use Cotter's model and walk through the 7 steps. If you have 10, one's at step 1, one's at step 6, it doesn't work anymore. So that's where the workload, the actual work, is not the issue. Everybody I know is ambitious, is motivated, likes to do challenging things and feel that sense of accomplishment. It's not the work that's the problem. It's everything other than the work. That's the thought load. We can dig into that, but that's a start.
Yeah, no, that's got me buzzing, because I knew there was a story behind it, and I knew it would be fascinating because, I mean, just the word, it brings so much, and it's like, oh my God, this is what I was missing, because you're right, like performance is so many things, and when people just try to put pressure on the performance, it would not come. But like those are the 3 elements, the attention, anxiety, and energy that you talked about. I think that if we start focusing on those things, we can get to better outcomes.
Yeah, that was what got me excited. At some point, not that long ago, I had this epiphany. Do you remember when we all talked about IQ as the most important thing about performance in organizations? And then at some point along the way, we learned about EQ. And started to realize like, oh, this IQ thing is nice, but EQ is so important. That's how I feel about workload and thought load. Like workload matters, obviously, it is a real thing. But what I believe is once people understand thought load, they'll pay way more attention to thought load than to workload. They'll realize that, I need to manage my thought load. If I manage my thought load, I can probably take on a much greater workload, get way more accomplished with way
Mhm.
less stress. So that's how I'm thinking about it. Is I would love, one of my friends, Michael Bungay Stanier, asked me, what's your measure of success for this book? And lots of authors say like New York Times bestseller list or selling
Yeah.
50,000 copies or whatever else. I said, it's one thing that I'm on the subway someday and I overhear a conversation where somebody says to their neighbor, like, oh my God, my thought load this week is brutal. I want thought load to become a word in our lexicon, because
Mhm.
as soon as it's there, and everyone who's heard the word in the, I don't know, year or so that I've been using it, as soon as they know the word, they'll tell me the next time I see them, now that I'm paying attention to my thought load, it's changed everything. So that's what I want. That's my number one measure. They don't have to know it was my idea. They don't, it's not about books. I already hit that list. It's about, do people begin to understand that it's my thought load I have to be ruthlessly
Yeah.
managing?
Yeah.
If I accomplish that, if I start to change work, uh, that's what I'm in it for.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, and
It might
I
as well have a lofty goal, right? Like, add a word to the lexicon. Sure, Leanne, go. But what? Why not? Why not try?
yeah, so yeah, lots of things stand out for me. Yes, the change, the pace of it, you're right. And like, yes, the like that constant pressure and stress to just keep going. I think that gets starts getting to people to us after a while. I want to like not boast too much, lay in, but I do want to tell you that this book did make me conscious. At first, I was like thinking about it in the wrong way. And
Okay.
then I was not even attacking the right things,
Oh,
thinking about
interesting.
where do I focus my attention, because your planner helped me to start focusing on three things a
Yeah.
day, not more than that, and like, try to not rush towards things. And then this is the first year of my life that I'm trying meditation very seriously. And
Great.
like, that kind of helps me. So there's a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. And I mentioned that book because it's the first time that a book goes into the depth of what exactly is meditation. Like I used to
Yeah.
think, okay, just sit quietly and try not to think. But thoughts come. It's like, how do you
Yeah.
struggle with
That's
thoughts?
not a
And
thing. Yeah.
yeah, and now what I try to do is like I try to like my whole day flashes in front of me and I kind of make peace with it. Things I
Yeah.
could have done better, things I did well. And I also like, in like other people's behaviors, like how do I deal with that better? So all of that flashes.
Yeah.
And I like that, that's like my moment of peace. So
Yeah.
a lot of it got triggered because of, understanding what exactly I need to work on.
Yeah, what's in my thought load? Yeah, it's interesting because I talk about, there are a few kind of killer apps for reducing thought load. So if we go back to what are the pieces of thought load, so one piece is the cognitive demands. So
Yeah.
all that you are expected to pay attention to and process cognitively. Second is the emotional burdens, which are the things that trigger you, the feelings, emotions, that sort of thing. And then the energy reserve. So the physical, mental, emotional energy. So those are the three pieces. So I refer to them as a treacherous triad because my husband's a neuroscientist. And as we got into all of the research for this book, we started to understand how each one of those three amplifies and exacerbates the others. So in so many ways, one of the most interesting ones we found is that as your energy declines, your frontal lobe is really only at its best for 45 minutes, an hour, something like that. And then glutamate starts to build up and it needs a rest. So when your frontal lobe, when you don't let it rest and it starts to kind of go offline, one of the first things to go is your ability to calibrate what to pay attention to and what not to. So this energy issue exacerbates the cognitive demands. All of a sudden you're paying attention to things you shouldn't. The next thing to go is your ability to differentiate between, is that a threat? Was that a side eye? Was that a snide remark? Am I in trouble? To figure out if something's a threat or not. So we get into this treacherous triad. So what I love is when we find like a killer app that addresses all three at once. And meditation is one of the best killer apps because meditation helps you learn how to allow a thought to move along. Like, thank you for passing through, but keep going, right? It allows you to stay focused. Secondly, meditation very much helps you with that emotional regulation. It helps you understand when you are being triggered, gives you a chance to choose how you want to
Mhm.
cognitively think about the emotional experience you're having. And we know it has great energy restorative. So there aren't very many things that are the killer app that act on all three at once, but meditation is one of them.
Oh, good to know.
Yep, you're
In
on the
all,
right track.
that feels really good to know, because you know that I think that's half the battle, like to figure out in life if you're on the right track or not.
Well,
It's
because
just
our
thinking,
lives are so full, right? We can't do everything.
yeah.
So, if you learn that 10 minutes of meditation every day, 10 minutes is doable, is something that would meaningfully reduce the cognitive demands or make me better at focusing, that they would help me better emotionally regulate, help restore my energy. Okay, that is the best 10 minutes going, right? That's good stuff.
And that's the stuff we need in procurement, because change is faster than ever.
Yeah.
We're a global complicated function. Like most of the procurement functions are set up in a global structure, but like the
Yeah.
level of maturity is very different. And sometimes like people want to get from 0 to 5 very fast, and that's just the reality of it. And yeah, like we're working on like different categories. Every person is dealing with at best 15 to 20 projects at the same time, like on an average. And I've done global analysis on this.
I'm just
So
imagining this procurement person spinning plates on sticks. Like, how many plates can I
yeah.
get going? And yeah,
And moreover, like at the end of the year, you're often in the situation where you feel like, okay, I did I manage to get something like
right.
meaningful out of this? That
Yeah,
happens.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so yeah, so that demand is real. But you're right, like meditation, I think one thing I've learned is that there are certain waves that your brain can reach through meditation. There's like
Mhm.
alpha, beta, gamma.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, Lian, that the way to manage change is the way to manage your brain. And yeah, like that equation, the thought load is equal to cognitive demands and plus emotional burden plus energy reserves. I want to dig into that a little bit more with a question. So that question, like I think that's the first trap I see procurement people face, and I have been through that. We want to constantly try and do more, like in less time, more. So this pattern, I'm sure, like it's persistent across people. We're not also
Yes.
any different, and like
Yeah.
like how do we break out of this? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the three things we can pay attention to. So we can pay attention to our activity, which is the doing more. So procurement activities, checking your emails, researching additional suppliers, staying up with the news on what's happening with tariffs or markets that might affect the supply chain or all those sorts of things. Those are all activities, attending meetings. So we can pay attention to activities. We can pay attention to outputs. Did I get the RFP out the door? Right? Did I successfully run the bid meeting? Did I award the contract or recommend to the business line leader who should get the contract? Those are all outputs. And then we can pay attention to outcomes. And outcomes are things we don't control, but are what it's all about. So certainly in procurement, you have really important outcomes. Some are cost related, but I think people really misunderstand procurement as being all about trying to reduce cost. Because if I reduce cost by introducing supply chain risk, that's really not a good answer, because I may save a little bit on the cogs or whatever. But if we all of a sudden can't produce product because we don't have raw materials, my saving a little bit on each unit is not me winning as an organization. So understanding what are the outcomes. So cost for sure, but is there some kind of procurement that creates strategic advantage? Did we get the right vendor to, get a great return on investment in whatever this project is. And as I said before, have we managed risk appropriately? So those are outcomes. So activities, we can pay attention to activities, we can pay attention to outputs, and we can pay attention to outcomes. In our world, so many of us, including our managers, unfortunately, are paying attention to activity. How much are we doing? How late are we at the office? How quickly do we respond to the email?
Yeah.
If you pay attention to activity, what you'll get is busy people. Only if you pay attention to outputs will you get productive people. But often when I say this in front of a room of managers or leaders, and I say the word productive, their shoulders go down and they look all happy and they're like, yes. I'm like, just so you know, productivity is a trap. Then they look all sad. They're like, what? What?
Yeah.
Nobody told us productivity is a trap. Because we are churning out so much stuff. But is that moving the needle? So it could be we go to RFP on something, we open up a big thing that ends up, solidifying the same vendor, and created a huge amount of work for our team and for the organization, and doesn't actually leave us with any better of an outcome. So we've slavishly followed the process in a way that maybe didn't make sense. But if we're focused on productivity, we make that mistake. So only when we focus on outcomes do we become effective. And so most of us run our day based on getting through the activities. We have a to-do list, right? We want to get our inbox down to 0 and hope that if we just work really hard, push through a bunch of workload, that we'll somehow get those outcomes. It's very unlikely. We have to flip it on its head and say, what are the most important outcomes? And it may be for in a year like what we're having right now with both tariff risk, tariff uncertainty, but also uncertainty in global supply chains because of global conflicts, all these things. We might say the number one outcome for this year is not cost savings, not some of the things we traditionally would have done. The number one outcome for us this year is to de-risk our supply chain, period. Okay, well, if that's the case, there's probably a bunch of tender processes that you may say, you know what, we don't need to do that one. That one is not where we have red risk. But we really need to accelerate this one, which might not have even been due to go to tender. So getting focused on outcomes and then asking yourself, if I open my calendar for the week, does my week look like it serves the most important outcome? Or is it serving everybody else's needs? Is it just pushing through as much activity or productivity as possible? And that's where we have a huge opportunity. And in procurement, it's so important because it's really easy to just be doing stuff.
Keep
The little
spinning.
hamster on the wheel. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And wow, I mean, first of all, I want to just say that, I'm blown away by your research, and anyone from procurement who's going to listen to this, they'll think that, wow, I wish all of my stakeholders were like Leanne and they understood a little bit of a fraction of what we go through, at the back end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
we have a really antiquated view of the value procurement brings. And it's such a waste, right? Of people who are there to optimize. Procurement is there to optimize incompatible and opposing needs and demands because they are almost always incompatible. The cheapest answer is not necessarily the highest quality or the lowest defect answer. The highest quality answer is not necessarily the most de-risked answer, blah, 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 right? Certainly see this with all the people who are procuring GPUs at the moment. And it's like, okay, well, we've got this many NVIDIAs, but how do we think about AMD and where do they fit? And then we can have just AMD and NVIDIA. And now you're seeing places like Meta and places like that saying, we got to start building our own. We got to actually build our own. We need a vertical supply chain because 2 companies isn't enough to de-risk, right? It is a profession all about optimizing incompatible needs, wishes, and demands. And when you're trying to do that, you got to manage your thought load because there's not room for superfluous stuff.
for 20 projects at the same time.
Well, if
And
you
yeah,
can do 20 projects, you better make sure that you know which of the three needs something creative, different. Human brains are pretty good at habit. So if it's the kind of thing you've procured a million times and you know all the players, you know the key variables, you know what? You can probably have a bunch of those projects going. The question is, which are the ones that now are very novel? Where the old answers, the things we know, will actually threaten the process
yeah,
because right, they're not the things that matter in the future, and you better know which of your projects are that. And that's what I'm going to say, you can't have very many of those, because those are
yes,
going to, and also, as you know from reading the book, I talk about the difference between different time slots in your calendar. So your highest value time, what I call your focus and forge time, when you can
yeah,
really think differently, versus your collaborate and connect time, or the time when you're basically drooling on the desk, which I call your kind of tidy and tend time, where you
yeah,
like do your compliance training or whatever. So that
yeah,
focus and forge time, if you are running 15 projects, understanding which are the three that are going to require that you break out of old patterns, that you look at this very differently, you better be putting those in your focus and forge time. The ones that are, more habitual, things you've done before, those can go in either your collaborate and connect time, or maybe in your tidy and tend time, even if you've done it that many times. But really understanding the difference.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that tool. I mean, the book is actually full of so many useful tools. As you were speaking, I was reminded of this other one. Like, I think one of the tip was cancel most meetings,
Cancel most meetings.
which yeah, and I'll tell you that, two things get in the way. One, our own public pleasing tendencies, and second, is like other people's needs, and that's where this prioritization and, thinking about outcomes you want to drive, and then coming and saying no to it with a, saying no the right way, like without hurting,
Right.
burning bridges. So I think
Yeah.
that's all a process. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm trying to learn that as well. The other one that you talk about, which is kind of my favorite, and I don't understand it fully, and I want to understand more, is eliminating dead work. And I think you're hinting towards some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is from a real story. So many of my so many of my ideas, because as I said, I'm an extrovert, have come from standing in front of a room full of people. So I was standing in front of a room full of the senior leaders of the operations function of a very large company people would know well. So I'm not going to say it because it's not a great story.
Okay.
And the leader, standing in front of his 250 top leaders of an organization of about 10,000 people, he stood up and he said, "Leanne, don't you think that we could get rid of 20% of the people in our function and not have any less productivity? Like that we've got a dead wood problem?" And first of all, I was just, as a human, kind of offended. And I knew the people in his organization, and I didn't know anybody I would call dead wood. These were good people, talented people
Oh.
who came to work. So I was pretty offended. So
Hmm.
this is when I got a little spicy. I was like, I'm not letting that fly, particularly not in front of all of his leaders. I'm like, wow. And so I just looked at him and I said, I've met your folks. I don't think you have a dead wood problem, but I do think you have a dead work problem. I think there
Wow.
at least 20% of your work is adding zero value. Of course, what I really believe is probably more like 50%. And until you help all of your people differentiate between work that moves the outcomes and activity that just is the hamster wheel, then you might be under the false assumption that you have people who are dead wood. But dead work is a huge, huge problem. And the only way we identify dead work is by being clear on the outcomes. But so few leaders can actually name the most important outcome they're trying to create, tie that to the outputs that people need to produce, and to the activities they need to do. That through line is not there for the vast majority of organizations. So until we get there, people are going to falsely conclude that they have dead wood when really they have dead work. And I just find that so offensive and awful.
Wow. I mean, that is such a powerful reframe, and like, kudos to you for, doing that in a room full of people. And like those are the
I'm not sure I
biases.
got invited invited back, but that's all right. I
That's
went down swinging.
okay. Yeah, because I
Yes.
think like sooner or later people sometimes that reminds me, Leon, like, I went through this issue that, I was trying to prioritize my work, and like I was finding it very hard, and then I went to my leaders and I said, "Hey, tell me what's most important, because otherwise nothing gets done." And I didn't get a clear answer. The answer I heard was, "Hey, we need to do everything. Like, what
Yeah,
can
it's
we do?
all
Like, we have the
important.
pressure to
It's
do
all
everything."
important.
And so then, like, the hard way is, this is what I learned, that, now I make a choice. Like, when I interviewed, I was very clear that, hey, I want the leaders that I work with, they understand the human brain
Yeah.
and they understand the concept of prioritization, especially in our line of work. And like, whether it means walking out of 8 interviews, it's fine. But like, that, yeah, so I learned it the hard way, but I
Yeah.
always appreciate, now I always ask for priorities and I direct
Yeah.
everything towards that, and it,
Can I
it
give
helps
your
my
leader
brain stay focused.
Yeah, let me give your listeners a few tips on that. So if you find yourself
Yeah,
in that situation, so first of
yeah,
all, you have to manage up so often, right? So instead of, you can try asking for outcomes. If you don't get them, you need to craft them yourself and then validate them. So, my sense is that with all that's changing in our particular world right now, I'm going to prioritize risk mitigation of the supply chain for this year. Um, and um, and I'm going to put cost management, because of course costs are elevating at a very alarming level. I'm going to put cost management as number two, and I'm going to pay a little less attention to things that are more about governance or procedure, or just doing RFPs because we like the hygiene things. How does that sound, right? Then the next piece, you can say, you know, of that, these to me are in order, the outputs that I need to be focused on first. Like this RFP process to me is number one on my list. Then you can also say things like, in my most valuable time, I'm going to make sure that, my most valuable 15 hours a week is on these three things. I'm going to then get as far as I can on this next layer in this, whatever, 5 hours a week. And I'm only going to allocate 5 hours a week for all this other stuff. So I'm going to need you to have my back if there are some things that don't fit, and I need your help to put. So literally managing up in a way that
yes.
says they may not know the outcomes. Ask first, but then share them. And if, as you share them and you say risk number one, cost number two, but just, governance or healthy hygiene procurement is going to be less important to me. If they're like, no, 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 like the board is really paying attention to how often we're going to tender on these services, okay, then let me shift them. And here are the implications of me shifting them. Or if, when you say these are the three things that are going to get my focus and forge time, they say, you're missing one, or I think it's less this one, more, great, right? But, I think most managers don't know how to think this way. And most managers need you to put it right in front of them, and then they can react, right? But then you've got from them their not permission, but their kind of endorsement of your priorities, the order in which you're working, the amount of time. So when you have to say no to something you get invited to, you're saying it, I'm saying no to this right now because this week or this month or until this RFP goes out or until this bid process is done, these are my priorities and I don't have room for that. Then your boss can have your back because they understand what you put in there.
Love that. I mean, I do some of it now, but you're right. Like, there's an opportunity to be very intentional and deliberate about it, and like, have those conversations, call
Yeah.
out implications, and like, just make it an active engagement from your
Yeah.
side. And the
Yeah.
best part, I think what you pointed out there for me is calling out what you will not do. I
Yeah.
think that's very important. What
Yeah.
gets
And
missed.
if you're
Yeah.
afraid of saying what you won't do, um, it's okay to say that that's seventh on the list and I've allocated 5 hours. And so if I didn't get to number 7, so one of the things is that we allow managers to talk to us about what's important, and that's not helpful. So the word priority comes from the Latin priori, which means first. And somewhere along the way, we lost that definition and we started using priority to mean it's important. So if your boss, if you ask a question and the boss's response is, they're all important, you say, absolutely, I understand they're all important. Which comes first? Which do I do first? Which needs to be finished first? So switch your boss out of important language, and you can do so by validating. I agree with you. They're all important.
Oh,
And
yeah.
therefore, it's important to me to work efficiently so that they all get done. I will get them done more quickly if I do one at a time. So what I need your help with is to know which one needs to be done first. So just switch your boss out of important language and into first language,
Yeah.
and you'll get a better answer from them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm smiling so widely because I remembered your story about priorities and priority from November.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like, I think the validation is very important because like they're under pressure as well.
Because their boss doesn't know how to do this either, right? So
Yeah.
you're probably also training your manager about how to have that conversation with their manager, because their manager is just saying it's all important too.
And this reminds me of the other thing in the book, that tool, expose hidden work,
Oh,
and that's our
big.
responsibility, right? Like, because
Yeah.
if they don't have visibility to everything that you're doing,
And
then
they
this is
don't.
this is not a conversation. Like they're under pressure to deliver certain things, and until you do that, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a
What
happy
I'm
life.
super excited, and I haven't told you about this yet, but
Yeah.
we are building. So let me tell you the other story of the book. At some point, I was telling this story about how I need to write a book for these managers who are drowning, like their heads are going underwater here. And at some point, I had this realization that, like, giving a book to somebody who feels like they're drowning is like throwing them an anvil. It's like, a book? Like, I don't need a book. And so I had this idea. What if the book were to be written to be a life ring? And all it is a life ring to pull you back onto the ship. And then on the ship, we could give you a bunch of resources. So I said to my editor and to my designer, I said, okay, here's my goal in how I write, in how you edit, and how you lay out. How do we make this book buoyant? So I hope when you read it, you feel the buoyancy. So for example, every section is no more than 4 pages because it needs to feel like I can get through it.
I
No page has text wall to wall. In fact, we decided not to write justify because that physically looks like a wall of text. So it's got a natural indentation on the right side. So there's air to it. So everything about it. So that's the book. The book is there to give you hope, give you
Ooh,
some things to start. But we're building an entire online called Thought World that is going to have all the tools and all the
wow,
resources and videos and scripts for managers and tools you
wow,
can use with your team. So that unseen work exercise is there, a
wow.
full exercise on how to help your team figure out the most important outcomes, outputs, and activities, how to help your team put that into their calendars. So there's an entire world. So if you buy the book, you get access to Thought World,
Yeah.
and it's amazing how much is going to be there. So I'm super excited. So the
Wow.
book is just supposed to be buoyant, make me feel like I can get my head above the water, and then we'll get you on the ship and help you.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I'm super excited about that.
Amazing. I mean, first, like, yeah, the idea is superb. Then, yes, all the work that goes behind in the book. And then we have tools to actually not forget about it and keep
Yeah.
practicing and
I
implementing
took
it.
my thought load
Amazing.
planner off my desk, but the thought load. Oh, here's an old one. Yeah. So, everybody who buys the book gets access to download the thought load planner tool and those sorts of things. So yeah, again, my goal is not to sell a number of books or any of those things. My goal is for people to be able to lower their thought load.
Conversation. Yeah.
And so the whole idea is, okay, how do we get their heads above water, get them on the boat? And then how do we give them the things that help them
Yeah.
manage their own thought load and manage their team's thought load? That's what I'm in it for. So
I can see that subway conversation happening.
I hope
Okay.
so.
I know we've been talking for a while, Lian. I have two more questions. Do we
Okay.
have time for some
Of
more? So
course.
I want to keep this going. We're kind of like, this is such an interesting topic. So, talking about another aspect, which is emotional burden, like of all
Oh,
the strategies that you've shared in the book, which ones have you seen in your experience, or like, people that you've worked with, which ones make the biggest difference?
yeah. So, the difference, I think people jump in where you jumped in, right? Managing their week more effectively to have their energy go to things that move the needle. Like those are the ones that you so quickly can see a benefit, right? But the emotional burden stuff is the stuff where people get a bit quiet and their minds are blown a little bit. So let's just share with them the major idea, which most people hear this and they just kind of go, whoa. So emotions are physiological, pre-conscious experiences we have in our body based on very complex patterns of past experience and neurochemicals and all those sorts of things. Emotions are not optional. They're not controllable. And so when we hear that, this person's too emotional or whatever else, that's actually that's not true. And it's not really a thing. But feelings are the cognitive overlays that we create. So humans are sense makers. So we want our world to make sense, and we will concoct a story to explain to us or rationalize or justify to us the emotional experience we're having in our body. Many of those feelings and stories are complete fiction, right? We tell ourselves a story to make sense of our sweaty palms or our lurching stomach or our racing brains. It doesn't mean it's true. And when we can realize that emotions are non-negotiable, but also full of data, whereas feelings are very optional, often fictional, and full of drama, we can take control of our experience of life in a way that is more profound. So the first part of the book had to come first, because if you don't focus your attention, you will never calm your anxiety. But it makes me sad in some ways, because it's like the real of the book is when we get to the second section and we get to talk about the emotional burden we feel and how do we reduce it. So we talk about it both in terms of how do I interrupt my feelings and find that moment to change the story I'm telling, to give myself more agency. But then in the management section, we get to the even more frightening piece of it, which is emotional contagion. So emotional contagion is when those base physiological experiences spread from one person to another. And you've all been in a room where, you walked in, it was perfectly fine, everything was great. And then it starts to spread and somebody's in a grumpy mood or feeling like this will never happen. And so the whole thing goes downhill. That's emotional contagion. And once we understand that we can interrupt that physiological experience and choose what narrative or story that we're going to tell ourselves and choose an action to turn that emotional contagion around, we feel so empowered. We can deal with the drama at work. So all of the stories about we need people to be less emotional at work, that's crap. Emotions are part of the human operating system. We need people to actually access the data in their emotions, process those emotions before they turn into feelings and narratives that create drama and spread. And so it's interesting. I was speaking at a big investment management company. Like these are like the titans of industry kind of guys. It's very funny because they were very tall. They were quite handsome. They were in very nice suits, and we were at a very high floor. And at the end of my talk, 3 of them came up and they wanted to talk about emotional contagion at home and with their kids. And we're raising the most anxious generation of children in history. And one of these people wanted to talk to me about how it was taking them down and how it was creating intrusive thoughts all day at work, and in the evenings he wasn't recharging his batteries because he was feeling this. And so I got to teach him all about emotional contagion, teach him the strategies that are in the book for how to prevent that contagion from spreading. And essentially, it's the difference between sympathy, which is feeling with someone, which is when I let your emotions infect me, versus feeling empathy, which is where I can understand intellectually what you're experiencing or how you're framing it, but I'm not experiencing it physiologically. And so, when I talk about what I'm proud of the whole book, but the safe stuff about talking about outcomes and calendars and all that is, we're not going to reduce our thought load until we're willing to go into the unsafe stuff,
Yeah.
which is into the emotional burden we're all feeling, how triggered we are. So much of what we're seeing. So if you think about the stress responses, we think about fight or flight all the time. And then we knew that fight, flight, or freeze, we got the third one added. And then recently, they've added a fourth one, which is called fawn, which is just sort of roll over on your back and be submissive. Well, what's interesting is fawning is a trauma response. To just like, yes, 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 please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me. It came from PTSD and trauma researchers. And I'm seeing fawning responses in the workplace, which says to me, people are behaving as if traumatized. And so we're not going to solve the thought load problem by just having safe conversations about activities. We need to understand psychological safety. We need to understand why we're seeing trauma responses, why there's that much fear. AI is accelerating this at a crazy rate. People are like, I just need to say yes, because if not, they're going to get rid of my job and my role is going to be done by an AI agent. So, I'm equally, you can see I get more serious because we aren't going to change work until we change these narratives about emotions don't belong at work and suck it up, buttercup. And there's a lot of that in the bromosphere at the moment. And it is a perilous path that we're on. It's frightening.
Ooh, yeah, there's so much to practice and learn. And I like, there's like this attention that first,
Yeah.
hey, start with the basics. And
Yeah.
then once you start doing a bit of that, then like, now think about this.
Yes.
And you're
Yeah.
right. Like, I think emotional, taking agency in every situation. And that comes when we decide to take a pause, if we're not rushing from activity to activity. And that's so important in our, like, in how we've, like, how I have seen it at work. And
Yeah.
then emotional contagion, like, so you're right, like that's so much about being empathetic as well.
Yeah.
Yes, you have a need. If you don't
Empathy
want
is
to.
so good, but sympathy is so bad.
Yeah, sympathy will not solve any problem, and forget sympathy. Like, I think even like, getting into that villain mode that, hey, I don't do that, that's going to alienate you as well. So
Yeah.
finding that right balance, hey, like, not getting sucked into that emotion, understanding that other people have their experiences and that's coming through that. And also, so I did something recently, like I never liked how I felt after any kind of gossip or complaining. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't like how I felt
Yeah.
internally, but I didn't know how to stop it, and how to stop it in a way that, like, I didn't alienate anyone. So recently I tried something, like, when it happened 3 or 4 times, and I was being empathetic, but I just also didn't want like that to be a repeated occurrence. So I just set a boundary. I said, hey, I might do that sometime, but I don't want to be that person and I don't like doing that. So
Yeah. I
that's
love
how I
that.
set that boundary.
I did
But
an article about that. I have an article on my website about what to do if someone gossips to you and what are the options. So yeah,
might
and
have read that.
you've like reduced your emotional burden then. You're like, you know what, that may be okay for them.
Yeah.
And I can be empathetic. So one of the things in that article is about if somebody gossips to you about something that you think is legitimate, you can help them by saying that's important. We need to be talking about that in the room with the people who
In
can
the
change it.
Yes.
Let me help you get that on the agenda, right? There are constructive things you can do. Yeah. So super important. Super.
Yeah, thank you. No, and I wanted to acknowledge the humanness of it, that that might be a natural response, and I don't want to make someone feel judged for doing that. But like, yes,
Right.
also that I don't like that when I do that.
Well, as humans, we're built for in-group and out-group. And what gossip does is it figures out who's my in and who's my out, right? That's all we're doing. It's a very natural process, but it's very unhealthy in othering people who we shouldn't be othering. So, yeah, I think cut yourself some slack if you do it. It's very natural. And, we have lots of opportunities in life to rise above things that maybe are defaults that are not what we aspire to be.
That's true.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Lian, one last question. I know there's so much here, but like the one that's top of mind for everyone is this flow state, this like elusive flow state. And I think we're kind of right on to building onto that. So how
Yeah.
do you reduce distractions in office environments? Most people are going to work 4 to 5 days a week now, and interruptions are constant. Like, how
Yeah.
do we balance that flow state in this kind of a
Yeah.
situation?
Um, well, so once you understand your outcomes and your most important things for the week, it's not that hard, right? I think we make a lot of excuses making it seem hard. So most open office spaces have like little cubicles or places where you can sit and do work. So just saying, like, I'm scheduling these 2 hours to go to a little cubicle. I'm not taking my phone with me. Because we know if your phone is in your visual field, it reduces the quality of your work, it detracts from your attention. And that's even if it's powered off. If your phone is in your visual field, it's hurting you. So you go and you find the little spot where you take your laptop with all notifications turned off, um, except you may say there's one way that people can reach you. So in case there's an emergency, like I'm going to leave my text messaging on, or if you're in a physical environment, this is the room I'm in, come find me if there's something that's urgent. And then a couple of other things. I call it mise en place, which is what chefs do before they cook. So before a chef cooks, they have everything, all the ingredients chopped in the way they need them, so that when they're cooking, it's not like, oh, the garlic's going to burn because I didn't have the onions ready. Everything's ready. So the same happens when we go to get into a
Wow.
flow state. You go like, okay, I'm working on this RFP. And then you're like, oh crap, I need that language from the RFP we did last year. Well, you're like, okay, I'm just going to go into my email to find the person who sent it to me. And then you have 4 new messages. You're like, oh, just look at those. So you want mise en place. You want to actually have the stuff on your desktop that you need to do the work. You need a clear, somewhat challenging but reasonable goal, and you probably need a couple of hours. After about 45 minutes, get up, move around, get a coffee, go back. But it's actually not that hard. It's just we've all convinced ourselves that it's hard. It's not hard. Just do it. But it's a lot harder if we don't have that clear outcome, that driving force, that I know what I have to accomplish, and I know that's the most important thing I have to accomplish. The other thing, if you remember, Do More Nothing as another chapter in the book, if you're struggling to get to a flow state, I highly recommend. So in
Not force it. Not
in the
try to
book,
force
yeah,
it.
don't
Yeah.
force it. So if you need to have a flow state, if you can get 45 minutes before the flow state to actually do nothing. So go for a brisk walk, but with no radio, no podcast, no music, no one to talk to. And what we find is that if you leave more air, just let things percolate, then you sit down for your flow state, it'll probably come more easily. So there's a bunch of stuff in the book to help you find those, what I call waterfalls to fill your cup from. There's a bunch of opportunities there, but
Waterfalls and
between those
wells.
two, waterfalls and wells, right? That some days we can get into flow and fill our cup from a waterfall. Those are good days. Those are really good days. Other days we got to dig deep and we got to go into our personal well. I should say, if your listeners are willing, we've created a thoughtload audit tool, which allows you to measure your thought load, to understand which of the 3 pieces is the biggest challenge. And I would love if people filled it out. But what's coming soon, it may even be up by the time that this is out, is a tool to help you understand what is your type of overwhelm. There are 4 very distinct patterns of how people behave when their thought load is high. So this tool will help you assess it, and then it's going to guide you into thought world, into the tools that are best for you. So that's really exciting. So if people want to fill out the audit, get a sense of your thought load and which piece of your thought load is the biggest issue for you to manage, to know which to dive in on first. And then this really specific tool to help you understand what is your particular brand of overwhelm. I'm a brooder. So when I get overwhelmed, I get demoralized, I hit the couch. But other people are like hurricanes who like start spitting out a bunch of stuff and distracting other people. So that tool
Wow.
is going to be really helpful for people, and it's going to then lead you to specific tools in thought world that will be most useful to you. So yeah, because the brooder for me, I need to deal with the emotional stuff first. I just know that
That's the
about
beauty
myself.
of talking to you, like these mesoplasts and like
Yeah.
brooder, hurricane,
Yeah.
like that's the language that stays. So
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
Lian. This was so refreshing, for a start to a morning. And I kind of started with collaboration bucket, but this actually gives me a lot of energy. But I also
Yeah.
on the distraction piece, like I'm a very easily distracted person, but like these kinds of things, taking breaks at the right time, like that's so much
Yeah.
active management,
Yeah.
going to different places, and yeah, I can see,
You
I
need,
can
we need
visualize.
tools. I have
Yeah,
this. Like, this is not a sophisticated tool, but
yeah,
this
25
works.
minutes.
Right. I can just say, I'm going to go into a block for Pomodoro for whatever, 40 minutes. Like, make it easier. Like, get yourself, like, I don't know, $20 on Amazon. This is for kids with ADHD and me. Find some tools. They help. They help.
Yeah, they do. They do.
And I can't get
Amazing.
any incoming texts or emails on this.
That's the beauty of it. Yeah, I think
Exactly.
that's also, like the more devices we look at, like sometimes I see, we're working with three devices at the same time. I kind of just work on my laptop, which is okay with whatever suits people. But yeah, like I think the screens kind of add to the cognitive.
The
Yeah.
average North American employee toggles between 1,200 screens a day. 1,200. And if you
Wow.
think about how many systems the average procurement employee is going between, like you're in your SAP and you're in your Salesforce and you're in your email and you're in your Microsoft Teams, and 1,200. So we lose a minimum of 2 seconds switching each time, which means you're spending 3 hours a week just toggling. So going to some analog tools, a nice notepad, can really, really reduce your thought load.
That's the way to go, analog. Awesome. On that note, Lian, thank you so much for making the time. This is going to be
Thank you.
super valuable to procurement community. Can't thank you enough. Please keep coming back and sharing
Absolutely.
all the dragons and new terms that
Yeah.
you come
Yeah,
up
we didn't
with.
even talk about the fire-breathing dragon. I'll save that for next time.
Yeah, it was the last time, so
Oh,
I'll
yeah,
add
with the
the
good
links,
fight.
and I'll also add the
That's
link
true.
to the audit, and yes, and the book as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.